What's the difference between a good leader and a great leader? According to Rachel DeAlto, a relationship and leadership expert, the great ones know that relatability is not just a soft skill. It is the bridge that transforms teams from functional to exceptional. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard. I went from being a lawyer and partner at one of the largest firms in America to becoming an online personality and successful entrepreneur. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your health and personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you chase joy while achieving success? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back to Hustle and Flow. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and we are on episode 249. And we have a super special guest on the show today. And I'm not sure how she's not been on this one before. She's done other stuff with us, but not on Hustle and Flow. So let me introduce you. Rachel DeAlto is a communication and relatability expert, media personality, keynote speaker, and author of not one, but soon to be two books. The first one is Relatable: How to Connect with Anyone, Anywhere, even if it scares you. And her newest book, which is coming out, I believe, July 29th, is The Relatable Leader: Create a Culture of Connection. Rachel maintains a law degree, a master's in psychology, and an influential social media presence where she shares psychological research updates and practical takeaways to connect and communicate more efficiently. Rachel, welcome to Hustle and Flow.
Thank you. It's funny. I was like, I haven't been on here, but I am very happy to be here today.
Well, I would love for you to share because, as you know, I have a lot of lawyers who listen. So anytime I have another lawyer come on who has escaped, I like for them to share what it was that made you exit out and how you made that transition. I mean, we both still have our law licenses, but I don't think we use them. I could be wrong about yours, but what made you want to take the leap from being a lawyer to doing something else?
Oh my gosh. It was actually unintentional. It's funny. I don't use my law degree or any of that knowledge except, you know what? I don't even read contracts, so it's not even for that. But I had every intention of remaining in the law. And then all of a sudden this startup idea just existed and I had to follow it down. And we ended up creating this startup idea that led to a private placement that led to raising $2 million. And so all of a sudden I was running this company and I didn't even know what I was doing. And I just kind of started saying yes to all the doors that led me away from law. And all of a sudden, a year later, I'm looking at everything. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm ever practicing again, because I loved what I was doing. And even though the company didn't succeed, it led to then the next door and the next door. And the irony of all of this is now, as you know, and we're both speakers, I now spoke for the New Jersey judiciary 6 times this year to all of the judges that I used to appear in front of and clerk for. And it's just this wild full circle, but I'm like, I'm never going back.
Okay, let's also talk about your master's, because we were actually briefly chatting before we hit record. The last time you and I think, saw each other was like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
We were having breakfast at, I think it was Pinewood Social, delicious
Yes,
meal.
Nashville.
You were buying a home. I was buying a home. I was buying expensive art that morning.
I remember the art.
As a gift to myself. And you were like working on your master's. And I was like, Rachel, what are you doing? Are you just collecting degrees? So what made you want to go get a master's?
I think idiocy. No, I really love knowledge. And one of the things I realized is I love research. And so I started trying to hire people to do research for me. And then I realized I wanted to do it myself, but I also wanted to understand it myself. And so I didn't have the desire to go and get some sort of PhD in psychology, because I don't want to be a clinician. And just the commitment to that is unnecessary for what I needed it for. But I did want to really understand understand the research side of psychology. And so
Mm.
I found this master's program that was really research based. It was a whole lot of writing and reading that I thought I had gotten away from. I remember the first time I opened up a study and I was like, my brain doesn't compute this. This doesn't work. And then you realize your neuroplasticity is real. So eventually it got easier. But I really just wanted to research. And that's really what led to a lot of my recent projects has been my own research.
Well, let's talk about your recent project and the book, and
Yeah.
let's also talk about leadership because I feel like it has never been a more difficult time to be a leader, but there has never been a more important time to be not just a good leader, an okay leader, an effective leader, but truly an exceptional leader. So, through your research, I mean, you speak to so many different companies and you work with so many different leaders. What is it that maybe most leaders are making mistakes with right now? Like what are they getting wrong?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And it's completely the basis for the book and the project because I wanted to understand. I think what we're getting wrong is that most people don't know what teams are really looking for from leadership. We think based on what we see out there, we do see there's so much thought leadership around leadership. And we're talking about vulnerability and authenticity. And I think Brene Brown is the most brilliant person alive. And yet we're not there yet. And what I
Mhm.
realized in my research, and then it's been really substantiated over time of conversations and additional research, is we're missing foundational principles, and that's where we're getting it wrong. Is the top element that people were looking for from leaders, the top trait was respect. And I thought that was already there. Respect, you feel like, wow, that should be the bare minimum, is that you feel respected by your leader. But then you start to think in retrospect, I'm like, well, there's been many times where I wasn't respected by my leader, or he was or she was just not a respectful person. And so you start
Mhm.
to kind of take a step back and you're like, oh my gosh, we are building a house upon a foundation that's got some cracks in it or isn't even finished. There's an entire row of blocks that need to be added here. So that's the biggest thing. And it was the biggest surprise because I think there's so many leaders they're trying to get to that next level, and yet we haven't really solidified that first level yet.
Well, and we live in like at the moment, right? We're in a very divisive culture.
Yes.
And in many ways, I feel like the discourse is more disrespectful now than
Yeah.
it ever has been. So, what should a leader do to really cultivate not just garnering the respect from their employees, but being able to truly give them respect?
Yeah. There's a quote that I came across in my research that stopped me in my tracks and will continue to do so. It's respect is the manifestation that believing another person has value.
Mm,
So believing another person has value. That's it. When you really think about it, I think it's just such a beautiful representation of when you think about what does that look like in motion. Manifestation of believing another person has value. How would you treat someone? How would you talk to them? Because that's what happens. That's where that disconnect and that's where those problems happen, is because sometimes we don't treat people like they're valuable. And
mm.
it doesn't mean that they have the value that you expected, but they have a value. And looking through that lens allows people to react differently, to talk differently, to act differently. Their behavior changes along with their words.
You would think you wouldn't need a tip or a tool or a technique to
Yeah.
find value in people.
Yeah.
But I think most people probably think that they're like, "Oh, of course I value everyone," right? Like I see
Yeah.
value in them as a human. And yet, the way we show up and interact doesn't always demonstrate that we have that belief. So, do you have any kind of recommendations for leaders who are like, "I want to make sure that in my interactions, I know that I am truly demonstrating this belief that everyone has inherent value."
Sure. And you're so right, because oftentimes we're not focusing on the things we're doing right, but we can pay attention to sometimes the things we do wrong. And that's where I would give the first tip of showing someone that they have value. One of the ways that we disvalue people is that we cut them off. We don't listen to them. We don't take in their opinions. So what's the opposite of that is that active listening, is having that presence in front of someone, is giving them the benefit of your attention and allowing them to speak and listening to whatever contribution they have. I mean, what it's so easy, and it's one of those things too. And I know there's so many leaders I work with that are like, we don't have time to have all these conversations. Like, why are you making me talk more? And I don't have time for the one-to-ones. And that's why we have these big meetings. And yet you do have time, because if you don't take the time, if you don't take those moments to listen, if you don't take those moments to really allow people to feel like they're valued, guess what? They leave. And then you're going to
Mhm.
spend triple the time taking care of the new person who doesn't have a clue of what they're doing yet.
I used to be in a management role and I remember it even though it was a long time ago, but my husband still is. And he often comes home and he was just like, the amount of time it takes to actually talk to everyone. In many ways, he feels like he is a therapist. And
Yep.
right, that he was like, I can't get my work done. So is that a bigger like corporate shift or something that like where we need to be recognizing that maybe there needs to be multiple roles in management and leadership so that there is time to truly be able to invest in those relationships and those people, as well as have others that are maybe doing some of more of like the strategic work? Or is it just you've got to build in more time for all of it?
I think it's likely a combination. I don't expect most organizations to start adding on, another level of managers or C levels just because they don't have time. But it is really looking at what is that day looking like for that individual, and if they don't have the time to be the leader that you need them to be, because that's what happens at the end of the day, which is it's one of the things that is so boggling to me. But I'm also looking at it from the outside in, right? So I'm coming
Mhm.
into an organization from the bird's eye view, thinking like, wow, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, and
Yeah.
everything would change. But when they're in it, it's very different. But when you think about just the cost, and I know a lot of people talk about the cost of disengagement, and one of the last numbers I looked at, it was like 1.9 trillion dollars. And when that breaks down into your organization, because you look at how whatever level of disengagement you have, that's real money that could be spent
Yeah.
on having somebody else take something off of someone's plate, so that you do have that opportunity. So someone like your husband who's wanting to do the right thing has the energy to have those conversations. One of my favorite leaders that I've worked with, when they first got their C-level job at a Fortune 500, and I don't want to go too far into details, but he got this job and his predecessor said, I don't want you to make a single decision for 3 months. I just want you to talk to people. I want you
Mm.
to have lunches and breakfasts and coffees. Don't do a single thing that's substantive, because they recognize the value of those relationships. And
Mhm.
so that's where, yes, there should be a shift. I just don't know how we get there. Who can we talk to, Heather? Because
I know.
someone needs to start adding some extra rules so that whatever it is. But I also think here's where corporate America has some challenges too, is the prioritization of time is something like you kind of just want to like shake their schedules and like let whatever is unnecessary fall loose, and
Yeah.
that's really something that every person has to look at and self reflect on.
Yes. So I'm thinking about transparency, like
Hmm.
both when I was in a role where I had managers, and then also even in this business, right? I have, retreats and masterminds where I'm in many ways the leader of a group. And I have seen it on both sides where how do you balance transparency with also protecting information and people and stories? I feel like that's often an area where things get muddied because and I feel like it's becoming more and more where it's like everyone wants all the details, right? Like you have to tell us everything. And you can't really do that as a leader. And so it's like, but you also want to have trust. So I'm just curious if you see that at all and if you have any thoughts on how you can still have connection while recognizing that there have to be some kind of like there has to be boundaries.
Sure. Yeah, and actually, honest and transparent was the number 5 trait that everyone was looking for from
Mm.
their leaders, and so that's something that obviously is a huge component of leadership. And I understand where you're coming from too. And one of the ways I look at it too is also, when mistakes are made or when challenges arise, sometimes you can't be fully transparent, but you can also be honest and transparent around your lack of transparency. So it's a little cyclical, but you can literally say, listen, we can't get into all of the specifics here because of confidentiality issues or protection of whatever, fill in the blank here. But here's where we're at. And I think most people value a discussion around it versus actually allowing that elephant in the room to exist and pretending it's not
Mhm.
there, because that's where people get so frustrated. That's where teams get so frustrated, where they're like, they're not telling us the truth. I've seen this before. I had an
Mm.
organization I worked with that was going into a merger but denying it. And so they were being acquired, and the team were hearing rumblings about it, but no one addressed it. And when they did address it, they said, not happening. And then it happened. What do you think happens to that team? Right?
That's not good.
Right? It just, come on.
Like, that's like next level. Like, that's not lack of transparency. Like, that's
That's
just straight up lying.
yeah,
Oh my goodness.
and it's just so frustrating. So, and there's so many different iterations of that. Maybe it isn't at that stage, but there's so many times where you can have these conversations, protect whatever you need to protect. And I understand that from a leadership perspective. That's why,
Yeah.
you look at
They may
our
not have
job.
wanted people to know
Yeah,
legally.
there's
There might have been a lot of reasons why. Yeah.
but you can talk about that, and then people feel at least like they're not being hidden, because that's what happens, is that most people, when you're not being honest and transparent, when you're dancing around it, they think it's worse. They think
Mm.
whatever you're hiding is so much worse than probably what it is. But when you say something like, hey, listen, we can't get into the nitty gritty. I don't even know why I use those terms. Nitty gritty, who uses that? I don't even but you can't get into those specifics, but this is what I can tell you. And then
Mhm.
they're always like, "Oh my gosh, I've been read in." I feel like I'm a part of this now. Because that's all people just want to feel, like they're a part of something. And when you're not being honest with them, they feel disconnected from it.
We've all seen, whether it is a press release or even with what's going on with law firms, and the chairperson will send out a memo as to what's happening. Or sometimes I wonder, I'm like, do these CEOs need media training? Sometimes I feel like it makes
Yes.
it worse because it's like
Oh,
you're talking, but you're not saying anything. How do you encourage people to show up and be relatable and be real and not just because I mean, that's what people hate. I feel like I could be wrong. I just feel like people, they're just like, you're not saying anything. Like everything that you just said, like as you were, it's like, we don't even believe you. Like, do you believe you?
no. But good media training should allow the personality to come through. Good media
Mm,
training should allow people to be relatable. That should be the intention of media training. When I've worked with some executives on whether it not necessarily for media per se, but just in terms of giving an address, or sometimes I'll be a part of an all hands or State of the Union type situation, and they'll bring me in and say, hey, can you listen to what they're about to say? And I'm like, okay, well, where can we interject some of your humanity? Where can you
mhm,
start to laugh at yourself a little bit? Because some of the best examples I have of a truly relatable leader are people who are authentic to themselves and not afraid to show different human elements.
mm.
And that doesn't have to be, and this is actually a perfect example, especially for if your audience is a lot of lawyers, you understand this. When I spoke to the judges, even the first time, they're like, well, it's really hard for us. We're supposed to be kind of separated, right? And I get that. I was like, but not within your chambers. Within your chambers, you're supposed to be connecting with your staff, whether it's your administrative staff, the court clerk, and your law clerk, all of those people, like they need to see that you're a human being. Otherwise, who are they working for? And so that doesn't have to be with sharing everything or deep dark secrets that only your best friend knows. These are elements of ourselves that we can put out there, whether it's humor. I love in my keynote, sometimes I'll share videos, and one of my favorite videos, I took it out because I think sometimes the perspective can change depending on the audience. But there was this clip of this Miss. She was Miss USA in 1997, and she was competing for Miss Universe. And they asked one of those questions, and it was something like, if you could do anything outrageous for a day, what would you do? And typically, a beauty pageant contestant's like, I'm going to save all the puppies. Like, there will be no world hunger. And you know what she said? She goes, I would eat everything. I would eat everything in the world, and I would eat it twice. And it was just so funny to
Yeah.
me because she's just hungry, and she's just,
Yeah.
she's making a joke about herself and her situation. And in that moment, you're like, wow, I like she's just like us. Like, it was that moment of humanity. And those
Mhm.
are the type of things that I try to convince leaders to recognize is she didn't talk about, her trauma. This wasn't some really vulnerable moment. It was just a human moment.
And I think, I mean, talking about judges, I think we actually trust our judicial system more when we actually see that they are human and that they have humanity. Obviously, that doesn't mean that they're going to show up in, their jeans and their t-shirt and just, like
Yeah.
be putting on a performance. But, we've all seen the videos go viral where there's a judge who genuinely cares,
Yep.
and you can still be neutral, but you can still care for what is happening in the room. And I think this happens with a lot of professions. And the higher you get up, I mean, I don't know about you, but like when I was in law school, just the decorum that you're taught can sometimes erode and undermine the humanity, which I don't actually think garners you more respect. I actually think it just makes people like you less.
Absolutely. And I do. I believe that you can be completely relatable and very human and still be very professional and very much respected and regarded and found to be, and all of the things that we're looking to be, regardless of your profession, but especially in areas of law. Because I do feel like some lawyers and doctors, it's like we have to be, you're all buttoned up for a reason. And I think about it in the medical field as well. I'm like, my favorite doctors are the ones that come in, they're like, what's going on? Versus pretending to be this stoic, statue version of themselves.
The last time I went to my gynecologist for my annual exam, she was wearing Taylor Swift friendship bracelets. And I
Fantastic.
loved it. I was like, this is a real woman that
Yep.
is really, really good at her job. She is amazing at what she does. And she's willing to bring her personality in as well. One other thing that I was thinking about was the leader who pretends to be really cool. Like we all know this leader,
Mm.
right? Like they're almost like trying too hard and they
Yeah.
want to be everyone's best friend. They're always playing it cool. And maybe you don't see that as much in like Fortune 500 companies, but can you can you go too far in trying to be relatable?
Yeah, and that would be the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, and that's so not authentic,
Mm,
and that's really what that person is. They're trying to be somebody else because they think that that person is someone who's going to be more liked or respected, or someone's going to be more loyal to, and all they're doing is creating the opposite effect. And so, to me, I do see that where you're just trying too hard, and part of that is, if you think that you could be that kind of leader, we got to work on why you have to show up that way. To me, that's probably a manifestation of an insecurity of, you and your real personality aren't enough, which they are. Whatever you are, whoever you are, whatever elements you have are enough to be liked by your team if you give them what they need. That
mm.
person's thinking that they need something else, and I guarantee whatever, that list of things that I talk about in the book are not being met, because that is entirely focused on making them feel like they're the authentic leader that they should be.
So even if it's a small team, if a team moves from, not real connection, they're a bit disconnected and a leader really starts to invest in
Mhm.
doing this work and creating more connection, what kind of shifts can they see? Like what are the results?
Yeah, and it really does. It's so amazing to see and get that feedback of when they start to shift from the leader's perspective, because yes, we can work on the connections between the teams, but it starts with the leader and their team. And so all of a sudden, and one of the examples, actually, we'll go back to the judges because this just happened last week, where one of the judges I had spoken to 6 months ago came in and said, one of the things with the judiciary is you can't give raises, right? You can't give time off, you can't give raises. It's a government job. And so
Right.
they're really kind of constricted in terms of how they show recognition and how they show appreciation. And I said, they just want your time. They just want to know that you respect them. They just want to know that they can trust you as a human being, as a leader. And so one of the judges started having like coffee talk time and spent 15 minutes a week just sitting with the staff, having a cup of coffee and just talking for 15 minutes, which sounds
Mhm.
insignificant. They said, what it has created, the ripple effect amongst the team together, amongst them and the team, amongst the in terms of the actual productivity of what's getting done, because people just feel like they're bought in. And it starts with the whoever's the top, whoever's that leader, manager, boss, is making that first step, and then everybody else follows suit. And I it's funny because I think about it from way before I ever thought that I would be writing a book or talking about this. And I think about the times when it really did make a difference to me, when I was in those positions where I was like, wow, that was a leader demonstrating everything that I'm talking about now. And you felt the ripple effect. You wanted to show up, you wanted to do well for them because they were taking care of you. And taking care of you is not about money and time off all the time. Those are great things, but it's about that attention and recognition and appreciation.
So the book comes out July 20, is it the 29th?
29th, yes.
Very exciting. So everyone can pre-order it now. We've got the Amazon link in the show notes. What can they expect if they buy the book, if they read the book?
Yeah, the book is such a guidebook. That was my intention. It's very practical. I love stories, so you're not going to be bored the whole time. Everything has to have a story attached to it, and so I use a lot of anonymized, is that the real word for that? We're going to
It
make that
works for
up.
me.
But anonymous versions of stories of clients that I've had, as well as personal experiences, but then really a guidebook of what are the practical ways to implement this. And so my intention is to create a blueprint. And so, maybe there's areas of relatable leadership that you've got down pat. Skip that chapter, go to the next one where you're like, this is where that's where that element really needs some work. So it really does provide something to everyone. And I love it for emerging leaders, especially people who are feeling like, wait a second, what am I doing now? I'm now leading people? Who taught me this?
Well, I am so glad that you wrote this book because you really have always been a leader at relationships. And when I think back to how we met, and this was before you even wrote Relatable, just being in the room with you and how you interact with others, like you really do have a gift of being able to make everyone feel welcome and included and can really bring a room together. And when I saw that you were doing this on leadership, I was like, this is so needed. And I feel like I'm like, now I see where this master's degree came in and where it was helpful. You were totally right the whole time when I was like, what are you doing? And
Lunatic.
I'm so excited to read the book because I think it is so desperately needed right now. So
Thank you.
thanks for writing the book and thanks for coming on Hustle and Flow.
This was delightful. I could do this all the time.
I absolutely loved that interview with Rachel, and I hope you did too. It reminded me of Janet Miller, who was the CEO of Colliers International here in Nashville. And over 10 years ago, I heard her speak as the CEO of how important it was to get away every single year by yourself to really unplug, decompress, and invest in yourself. Not in a leadership program, not in, some kind of training, but truly just taking care of yourself, to take care of the human within you, and how her doing that actually allowed her to show up and be a better leader and see the humanness and the value in all of her employees. So Janet is actually the reason why I host my retreats at Miraval, because that's where she used to always go. And I was so influenced by that. And she was right on. It's the perfect place for a transformational retreat. If you are a leader who has not taken care of yourself in a really long time, who has maybe never invested in their own self-care, their own just well-being, and I don't just mean in terms of like going to the spa. As she said, she would always work with therapists and other practitioners to really help her come back to herself. And that is the whole point of the Joy in the Journey retreats. So depending on when you are listening to this, you may still have a chance to apply for the next retreat. It is September 28th through October 1st, and applications close tomorrow, June 25th. So depending on when you're listening to it. But June 25th is the cutoff. So go check it out and apply. heatherjoyhubbard.com/joy in the journey. And if you missed the cutoff, still go check it out because you can always register to get on the wait list for when we do the next one in 2026. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, give the episode a like and leave a comment below so we can keep the conversation going. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a future episode or announcement. Listening on Apple, Spotify, or another podcast app, you can watch the video and join in the after show conversation by visiting hustleandflowpodcast.com.